The saloon doors swung on their tired hinges, letting in the last light of day, a warm, honeyed gold that spilled across the dusty floorboards like an old memory trying to find its shape again. Inside, laughter curled like smoke above the card tables, too loud, too sharp, as if the town were trying to laugh over something it didn't want to name. The piano in the corner had gone quiet. Its keys, chipped and waiting, bore witness to the stillness that had taken hold of the room. All eyes were on the makeshift stage, a raised plank between two barrels where the bride stood, unmoving. Her dress, once white and stitched with hope, sagged with travel dust and wilted dreams. A tear along the hem showed her boots. They were too fine for her now. Her veil clung to the sweat at her temple, its lace yellowed by sun and sorrow. No one cheered. No one clapped. They simply watched. Like men watch a fire burn low, not enough to warm, too much to leave. The mayor's voice, slick with whiskey and smugness, cut the silence. "Well now, gentlemen," he said, one hand on his belly, the other gesturing to the girl as if she were a crate of peaches. "What we got here is a rare thing, an unclaimed bride. Jilted at the altar. Through no fault of her own, mind you. Her groom ran off to the next county, saying he changed his mind. But she's still got the dress, still got her vows memorized. All she's missing is a name to say M to." A ripple of amusement moved through the crowd, low, uncomfortable. Some shifted in their chairs. Others stared into their beer, suddenly fascinated by the foam. The bride said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't look up. Her hands stayed laced in front of her, fingers knotted white. There was something in her stillness, something harder than shame. She had no more dignity left to guard. She'd been stripped of that when the church bell rang and no one came. In the corner, half shadowed by a slat of dying sunlight, Ben Cutter stood nursing a glass of water. He never drank liquor. Not since the fire. The townsfolk whispered he kept the scars under his shirt and his guilt in his silence. He didn't speak much, didn't barter much either. Just worked the edge of his land, fixed his own fences, and brought in wounded animals when he found them limping by the creek. He hadn't planned to come into town that day, but the blacksmith had owed him a hinge for months, and the ride helped him sleep. Now he watched the woman on the stage like a man watches a storm he knows will break. Not with fear, with knowing. The mayor cleared his throat. "We'll start the bidding at $10. That's cheaper than a mule and prettier, too." A few snickers. One man raised his hand, more for the joke than the offer. She didn't flinch. 15, the mayor tried, scanning the room with mock cheer. 20. Ben looked down at his hands. They were cracked from work, sun-darkened. He remembered a moment, years ago, of someone trying to hold them. A girl with soft skin and kind eyes. She'd left when the fire took the barn. Couldn't stand the silence afterward. Couldn't stand him. The room waited. The mayor's grin began to twitch. Surely someone here don't want to let a whole wedding go to waste. 30, Ben said. The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the saloon like a clean knife. Chairs scraped. Heads turned. Even the bride's chin lifted, just slightly. The mayor blinked. "Well now, Ben Cutter. Didn't think you were in the market." "I'm not," he said. "But she don't belong here." The words landed flat, without flourish. A statement, not a rescue. 30 it is, the mayor stammered. "Do I hear 35? Silence. Even the piano seemed to hold its breath. "No. Sold, then. To Mr. Cutter." Ben didn't move right away. He just stood, finishing his water like it was the end of a sermon. Then he walked forward, steady and slow. He didn't take her hand. He didn't touch her. He simply looked at her until she looked back. Her eyes were dark, not angry, not grateful. Just tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind of tired that doesn't sleep out easy. "You don't owe me anything," he said low enough for only her to hear. "You can ride with me or walk your own way, but you don't stay here." She looked at the door, at the snickering men, the floor sticky with beer and shame. Then she nodded. They walked out together. No one cheered. No one stopped them. Outside, the sun had dropped lower, turning the street to bronze, and the sky, behind the chapel cross, to blood orange. Her veil caught in the breeze. He reached out and caught it before it flew. She hesitated, then took it from his hands and tucked it into her bodice. They reached his horse. He helped her mount, not with ceremony, but with care. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect it. The horse stepped forward, and Dry Creek Hollow fell behind them like a bad page turned too late. The road stretched out ahead, flat, open, rimmed with cottonwoods that had already begun to whisper a fall. Dust rose behind them, soft and steady. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. But as the sun leaned westward and the sky blushed with the last light, she turned her face into the wind, and for the first time all day, her shoulders dropped, not in surrender, but in the barest, first flicker of relief. Back in town, the saloon swallowed its laughter again. The piano remained untouched, and someone muttered into their glass, "Ben Cutter always was too soft for his own good." But out on the trail, there was nothing soft in the way the horizon opened up for them, and nothing weak in the way silence could say, "You can begin again." And that's how it started. Not with vows, but with a ride, a stranger, and a woman who didn't want saving, just a way out that didn't break her further. The road unfurled ahead in a long ribbon of dust, the kind that clung to boots and lashes, settled in the corners of mouths, turned every breath into a whisper of earth. The prairie wind stirred the edges of the trail, brushing the tall grasses in slow waves, like fingers combing through a forgotten memory. She rode ahead of him by half a length, not from confidence, but to keep space between them. Ben let her have it. He knew the weight of too many eyes, too many hands. They hadn't spoken since leaving Dry Creek Hollow. The only sounds were the creak of saddle leather and the rhythmic clop of hooves striking the ground in unison. Two riders, one silence, and the long hush of dusk setting in. She held herself like a figure carved from stone, spine straight, veil stuffed in the saddlebag. The train of her ruined wedding dress had been torn clean, the raw edge fluttering behind her like a wound left open to air. The ring he'd bought, small silver with a turquoise bead set into its curve, lay in his coat pocket, warming against his chest with every jolt of the horse. He hadn't offered it yet. Not on the stage, not in the saloon, not even when she swung into the saddle without waiting for help. He told himself he'd offer when the moment felt right. But maybe it never would. A hawk circled overhead, calling once, its cry lonely and sharp. She looked up briefly. Ben saw her lips part, as if to answer, then close again. It struck him how young she looked without the veil, and how old her silence made her seem. They came upon a shallow stream that glittered with dusk light. She dismounted first, leading the horse to drink, never once asking permission, never offering a glance. Her fingers, red from wind and leather, trembled slightly as she cupped water to her lips. Ben stayed back, watching. It was the first time he saw the tears. She didn't sob, didn't crumple. She just knelt, elbows resting on her knees, and let them fall without wiping them away. They dripped down her chin, vanished in the current. The kind of tears a person didn't cry to be seen, but because holding them in any longer would splinter something too deep to name. He dismounted quietly, giving space. From his saddlebag, he drew out a folded piece of cloth, the ring tucked inside. He walked over slow, stepping wide around her to give room. She didn't look up. "I bought this," he said softly, placing the ring in the grass beside her boot. "Didn't know if you'd want it." Her eyes lifted, not to him, but to the ring. She stared at it a long while, like she was trying to decide if it was bait. "I don't need another man's mark," she said, voice husky with travel and restraint. "It ain't a mark," he replied, steady. "It's yours to wear or bury. I just didn't want to pretend I hadn't thought about it." She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and stood, brushing her skirt down. She picked up the ring, held it between her fingers, then placed it gently into her own pocket. They remounted and rode on. The sun dipped lower, brushing the land in burnt gold and violet. Birds rustled in cottonwood branches, settling. The shadows stretched, lengthened, became stories on the ground. Ben studied her in the corner of his vision. There was a line at the corner of her mouth that hadn't been there before the tears. Something softer, not peace but permission, to be angry, to be bruised, to not be fine. The trail cut left, leading them to a narrow canyon pass. He knew this road like breath. It would take them to his ranch by nightfall, if the horses didn't throw a shoe or stumble. The land out here was all quiet and windsong, nothing but the creak of wood fences and the sigh of the plains. No neighbors, no gossips. She asked, "Is this your land?" He nodded. "Most of it. What's not mine don't bother me." "I don't plan to stay long," she said. There was no threat in it, just clarity. She was still watching for cages. "I don't plan to stop you," he replied. She didn't answer. As the sky turned to pewter and the moon began its climb, they reached the cabin, a small home built with honest hands. The windows glowed faintly with reflected twilight, shutters closed tight. A porch creaked under its own weight. A rusted horseshoe hung above the door, nailed sideways, its luck spilled long ago. Ben dismounted first and tied the horses. He opened the gate slowly so it wouldn't squeal, then turned to her. She hesitated at the edge of the porch. "It's warm inside," he said. "Stove's already set. I'm fine out here." He didn't argue. He went in, lit the lamp, and came back out with a cup of water and a blanket. Held them out without a word. She took them both, nodding once. He left the door unlocked. Inside, he stirred the stove to life, its pop and crackle chasing the chill from the corners. The smell of cedar smoke filled the room, mixing with dry sage and old pine. He sat by the window, watching her silhouette on the porch. She didn't sleep, just wrapped the blanket tighter and kept her eyes on the horizon, as though waiting for someone to come reclaim her, either her past or some version of herself left behind. He dozed for a time, but woke before midnight. The fire was low. He stepped outside again, barefoot, careful on the wooden slats. She turned toward him, startled, eyes wide in the dark. He raised his hands. "Only brought coffee. It's hot." She blinked, then slowly took the cup, warming her hands around it. For a long time, they said nothing. Then, very quietly, she murmured, "You could have just left me there." He shrugged, voice low. "I know. I don't understand why you didn't." He sipped from his own mug, letting the silence breathe between them. "Because I've been left before," he said at last. "And it don't ever feel like you deserve it, even when the world says you do." The wind picked up. The porch groaned. She didn't reply, but she sat down slowly on the bench beside him, cup held steady. The blanket shifted, brushing his arm, and she didn't pull it away. They watched the stars rise, quiet things that blinked without asking for anything. In the stillness, he reached into his pocket and felt the empty space where the ring had been. She still hadn't returned it, but she hadn't thrown it either. When he stood to go back inside, she surprised him. "Is there a room I can use?" He paused. "There's only one bed. I won't take much space." He nodded once, held the door open. She walked in first, and though she didn't say good night and he didn't try to touch her hand, something passed between them. Unspoken, not a promise, not yet trust, but something like breath after too long underwater. She lay down facing the wall. He lay down facing the door. And in the hush between their breathing, the prairie outside exhaled with them. A stillness full of not yet things. Morning broke slow, stretching gold fingers across the floorboards, touching the cabin's bones like a quiet blessing. Dust shimmered in the sun's slant, and for a moment, all was still but for the low pop of cooling coals in the stove and the breath of two people who hadn't yet decided what to call each other. She rose first. The blanket he'd given her was folded neatly at the foot of the bed, the sheet pulled tight, her side of the pillow untouched. She moved like a ghost made flesh, quiet feet, careful hands, as if the walls might judge her if she made too much noise. Ben was already outside, splitting kindling in the morning chill. She could hear the rhythmic thump of axe against stump, steady and precise. She poured water into the tin kettle and set it over the flame, hands shaking slightly. The heat was slow to rise, the flame reluctant. She crouched near it, rubbing her palms together for warmth. The cold inside the cabin wasn't cruel, just honest. Like everything else here, there were only 2 tin cups on the shelf. She rinsed both and set them on the table. No sugar, no milk, just boiled water and dark rounds. It smelled bitter and clean. A man's kitchen, but neat. Not for guests, but not unloved either. She found bread and dried apples. Sliced the bread into 2 equal pieces. Still she didn't know what she was to him, or he to her. But breakfast made in silence was a language she understood. When he entered, carrying an armload of chopped wood, he paused. She didn't look at him, just poured coffee into both cups and slid one toward the far side of the table. Ben set the wood down without a word. Saturday. Took the cup. The heat warmed his palms. He sipped, then nodded once. She finally spoke. You keep a clean place. He looked up, the faintest flicker of amusement in his eyes. Don't much like stepping over things. That was all. Later, she took the kettle and walked to town alone. He didn't stop her, just watched from the porch as her figure grew smaller along the road. The wind tugged at her hem. Her shoulders were set upright and sure, but he saw the tension in her elbows, like she expected to be stopped. Or followed. Dry Creek Hollow was a different town in daylight. Less cruel, more curious. Women hanging laundry paused mid-clip. Men on porches tilted their chairs, their eyes. Someone spat tobacco and muttered something too low for her to catch. She kept walking, head high, veil tucked away. The kettle was an excuse, an old one she'd seen hanging in the mercantile window 2 days past. Inside the shop, the air smelled of flour, oil, and faint lavender. Milo Hatch, the shopkeeper, squinted at her when she stepped in. He was a careful man, more talk than trouble. "Miss," he said, giving a nod that landed awkwardly. She placed the kettle on the counter. "I need a better one." He stared at her. "Didn't expect you back in town so soon." She didn't answer. He cleared his throat. "You know folks are saying, well, not that I believe it, but they say Ben Cutter bought himself a bride." She looked him square in the eyes. "Then they can say he paid more kindness than this town's shown anyone in years." He blinked. She left with her kettle, and no more words exchanged. Back at the cabin, she set it on the stove without ceremony. Ben watched her as she worked. She moved differently now, still cautious, but grounded, like someone choosing her weight in the world again. That evening, he repaired the back fence. She swept the porch. Her motions were methodical, like the act itself gave her something to belong to. As twilight slipped in, she went inside and returned with a plate, a wedge of cornbread and a jar of plum jam he hadn't touched in a year. He looked down at the offering. "You cooked?" "No," she said. "Found it in the cupboard." He took the plate, nodded, ate quietly. She sat beside him without asking. In the distance, coyotes sang to the dusk. The horizon turned lavender and rust. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Finally, she asked, "Why did you really buy me?" He took a slow breath. "Didn't think anyone else would treat you right." "That's not a reason." "No," he agreed. "It's not." But it was enough. She turned the tin cup in her hands, watching the metal catch the light. "They wanted to humiliate me. Not just sell me. Break me." He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. "I'd rather die than let them think they succeeded." He looked over at her, eyes steady. "You didn't die. And you're not broken." She stared back, uncertain whether to believe him. The wind moved across the porch like a hand smoothing tension, and for a flicker of time, she let the words sit in her chest. Inside, the fire cracked again. The walls glowed soft with it. She rose, stepped in, then paused in the doorway. "There's a ribbon on the windowsill," she said without looking back. "It's blue. Leave it there." He said nothing. Later, after she'd gone to bed, he stood by the window, staring at the folded ribbon. Its color caught the firelight, reminding him of river water under moonlight, cool and unclaimed. He didn't touch it. Instead, he folded a piece of muslin cloth and set it beside the ribbon. The next morning, the ribbon was gone. She wore it not in her hair, but looped around her wrist, like a promise she hadn't yet spoken aloud. That day, no one passed their fence. No visitors came. But gossip traveled faster than dust, and in town, the talk changed. Some said she was already expecting, and that's why Ben stepped in. Others claimed he'd been in love with her since before she was jilted, that he'd waited for the scandal to clear. But one woman, Mrs. Dell, known for her vinegar tongue, said simply, "Ben Cutter never took what wasn't given. If she stayed, it's 'cause she chose to." No one had an answer for that. Back at the cabin, Ben carved a new spoon out of cedar. She mended a quilt that wasn't hers. They passed each other in small spaces. Their hands brushed once over a drop tin cup, and neither pulled away too quickly. They didn't smile. Not yet. But something began to soften. Not love. Not trust. But a kind of shared silence that didn't hurt anymore. When she sat that evening, brushing dirt from her skirt, she glanced at the horizon and whispered, "It's colder here than I thought it'd be." He stood, stepped inside, and came out with the same soft blanket from her first night. He laid it across her shoulders without a word. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The days passed like drifting snow, quiet at first, but piling up where you didn't see until your boots sank. She and Ben had found a rhythm in the stillness. No names for it, no future promised, but each morning brought fresh coffee, a clean porch, a mended fence, and some unspoken peace built from those small, durable acts. But peace is a fragile thing in Dry Creek Hollow, especially when a woman's dignity is involved. And nothing draws out cruelty like the scent of a soul trying to rise again. The news came by way of hoofbeats. 2 riders, dust trailing them like smoke from a bad fire. She was inside shelling peas at the kitchen table, fingers slow and careful, when the thudding of hooves reached her ears. Ben stood sharpening a blade near the porch rail, and when he turned, something in the angle of his shoulders went still. She stepped outside just as the first rider reined in. Percival Thorne. His name had once made her breath catch, back when she was still full of hope and church dreams. Now it made her stomach harden. He hadn't changed much, same slick hair, same white gloves, same lips shaped like empty promises. But the look in his eyes was different. He wasn't here for forgiveness. He was here to stake a claim. "Well," he said, sliding off his horse with a practiced flair, "don't you look rustic?" She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood there with a bowl of peas in her hands like a woman who had nothing left to offer, and nothing to hide either. Ben stayed beside the porch rail, unmoved, knife in hand, but not drawn. The second rider dismounted, a younger man, broader in the shoulders, slower in the eyes. His brother, probably. The resemblance was strong. He leaned against the hitching post and cracked his knuckles with the glee of a man hoping for trouble. Percival smiled like a man preparing for theater. "I thought maybe you'd gone off and died after what happened, but imagine my surprise when word reached me. A bride auctioned off like cattle, bought by a fence-post widower who can barely look you in the eye." Ben didn't move, didn't respond. He didn't need to. "You disgraced my name," Percival went on, pacing toward the steps, "embarrassed my family. I forgave you, you know. I was willing to forget. But then I hear you're parading around town like some virtuous prairie saint, and I thought, well, I'd better see it with my own eyes." "You left me," she said finally, her voice like winter, thin, cold, and clean. "After your father threatened to disown you for marrying someone beneath his bank ledger. Don't act like this is righteousness. You were a coward." A flicker passed over his face, just a flicker, but enough to make his brother shift uncomfortably. Percival covered it with a smirk. "Didn't think I'd come for you, did you?" Ben stepped down from a porch with quiet purpose. The knife was no longer in his hand. It was tucked back into his belt. His voice came low. "She's not yours to come for." Percival's eyes flashed. "You think buying a woman gives you the right to talk?" "I didn't buy her," Ben replied. "I gave her a door. She chose to walk through it." Percival looked at her, eyes narrowed, tone curling cruel. "So you're sleeping under a stranger's roof now. What does that make you?" Her hands trembled. One pea rolled out of the bowl and landed in the dirt. But she didn't look away. "I sleep with the door unlocked," she said. "That makes me freer than I ever was with you." The second brother took a step forward, but Tim's gaze cut to him like flint. The man stopped, unsure now. "We done here?" Ben asked. Percival glanced at his brother, clearly waiting for him to speak, but the man just shrugged. Whatever show they'd come to put on had failed to catch fire. The truth stood too solid between them. Percival turned his attention back to her one last time. "You'll regret this," he said. "They always do." "Then I'll regret it in peace," she answered, and stepped back into the shadow of the porch. The Thorne brothers mounted up, their departure less triumphant than they'd planned. Dust rose behind them, hanging in the air like a lie too proud to vanish. Ben didn't follow. He stood where he was until the sound of hooves disappeared entirely. That night, the cabin was full of stillness, the kind that doesn't soothe, the kind that rattles around in your chest like dry seeds. She stood at the stove, stirring beans, and the spoon clinked too hard against the pot. Her shoulders rose with every sound. He said nothing, sat at the table, slowly oiling the hinge of a barn door he hadn't fixed yet. But his eyes flicked toward her more often now, each glance trying to measure the break inside her. At last she spoke. I was 17 when he first came calling. I thought he saw me. Not my clothes. Not my family. Just me. Ben nodded, saying nothing. He said he'd marry me in secret if I wanted. That his parents would come around. That they'd see me different once I wore the ring. She laughed softly, but there was no mirth in it. But they never did. And when I defended a friend of mine, called his father out on cheating the widow Yates, he dropped me like a burning coal. Said I made too much noise. She stirred the pot again. The wedding was still set, but I knew. Deep down, I knew he wouldn't come. I waited anyway. She turned to face him. I didn't tell you all this because I was ashamed. Not of what I did, but of how long I waited for him to do better. Ben met her eyes. Sometimes hope stays longer than it ought. She looked at him for a long time, her throat working like something raw was lodged there. Then she moved to the table and sat across from him. I'm not the woman I was. I don't believe in fairy tales or preachers. I don't sew dreams into lace anymore. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Just set the oil can down and waited. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the ring he'd offered. It had worn a groove against her thigh these many days. I didn't wear it because I thought it meant ownership. She turned it in her fingers. But now I see it's just a thing. It doesn't make me his or yours. It just means someone saw me and stayed. She slid the ring onto her finger, not with flourish, not with tears. Just finality. He said nothing, but something unknotted in his face, and his hands stilled completely. Outside, coyotes called to each other in the distance. The fire in the stove danced low. The blanket she'd once refused was draped now over the arm of the chair, her sewing basket tucked beneath it like it had always belonged there. They sat together as the light dimmed. She said, I won't run anymore. And he answered, I'll still leave the door unlocked. Between them was a porch, a table, and everything they hadn't said, but what stretched across it now wasn't silence. It was trust, just beginning. The sun sat low and heavy in the sky, its golden breath spreading across the ridge like spilled oil on water. The light was soft enough to bless scars, but strong enough to show them. A hush lay over the land, no wind, no birdsong, only the quiet rustle of two souls preparing to choose. She wore the same dress she'd been auctioned in, but it looked different now. She had scrubbed it clean in the creek herself, stitched the torn hem with uneven but careful thread, and bound the bodice with ribbon blue, the one Ben had left on the windowsill. It hugged her like armor and floated like grace. No veil this time, no flowers, no music, just the plain, proud stance of a woman who'd lived through fire and chose to stay standing. Ben waited for her by the fence line, his figure outlined in the copper dusk. He'd trimmed his beard. His shirt was pressed, tucked into trousers clean enough to show effort, not vanity. In his hands he held a small wooden box, no bigger than a biscuit tin. She stopped 3 paces from him, close enough to feel his breath between sentences, far enough to say she hadn't been chased here. He opened the box. Inside lay a comb, carved from cedar and smoothed by hand. Its teeth were imperfect, but the grain was polished, shaped like soft wind over canyon stone. I didn't make it to claim you, he said. I made it so you'd have something that was only yours. She reached in and lifted the comb, tracing it with her fingertips. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Just breath, and behind it, something blooming too wide to fit in her chest. Then she said, you carved this for me before I said yes. I did. Why? He looked at her, steady. Because I knew it wasn't about you saying yes. It was about me saying I'd be here, whether or not you could say anything back yet. Her fingers closed around the comb. Then she looked out at the ridge, the land falling away into shadows below, and said, "Then let's say the words." There was no preacher, no lawman, only two people and the slow turning of the earth beneath their boots. She said, "I promise nothing perfect, only that I'll speak the truth, even when it hurts." He nodded. "And I'll stay beside you, even when the road runs crooked." She stepped forward. "If you need silence, I'll give it. If you need to be seen, I'll look." He replied, "If you leave, I won't stop you. But I'll keep the door unlatched and the lamp burning, always." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. "I've kept it long enough," she said. "But now I want it known. I wasn't bought. I was seen." And with her own hand, she slid it onto her finger. The light caught the turquoise stone. It wasn't new. It wasn't grand. But it fit. Ben looked down at her fingers, then into her face. "I do," he said. And though the words were quiet, they landed with the weight of a lifetime's promise. Her breath caught. "Then, so do I." For a moment, nothing moved. Then the wind returned, soft as breath through sagebrush. The moment passed, but the meaning didn't. They stood there in the light until the horizon turned to fire and the first stars winked through. Behind them, far off in the town, the last thread of peace was snapping. A rider galloped up the trail, kicking gravel and dusk. It was Milo Hatch, the shopkeeper, hat clutched in his hand and eyes wide with urgency. "Tim," he called out. "She needs to know, Thorne's at it again. He's in the saloon tellin' folk she's a liar, a thief. Says she seduced you into giving her land that ain't rightfully hers." Ben stiffened, but it was her face that changed. Not fear. Not shame. Just that cold, clean anger that rises when a woman has had enough. "Stay here," he said, voice low. "No," she replied. "This time I go with you." Milo looked between them, uncertain. She walked past them both, feet steady. "I've had my name dragged through dust and spit on since I was 17. Let them look me in the eye when they do it now." The ride into town was quick, the silence between them sharper than blades. But there was no tension, only the heat of certainty. The saloon door slammed against the wall as she pushed through. The piano player stopped mid-note. Percival Thorne stood at the center of the room, his whiskey raised, speaking with flair to the gathered crowd. "And you know how she smiled at me that day? Like she'd never done wrong in her life. Like she thought she could marry up just because she bathed regular." She stepped into the middle of the room. The crowd parted slowly. Percival turned, smile faltering. "Tell them the truth," she said. He sneered. "This ain't a courtroom." "No," she said. "It's a reckoning." He opened his mouth to retort, but she raised her voice first. "You left me when I was young and stupid enough to believe in you. I kept quiet. I walked away. I didn't ruin you when I could have." She took a step forward. "But now you spread lies about a man who offered me nothing but respect. About me, as though I'm some coin you lost under your boot." The room held its breath. She looked around. "Ask yourselves, what's more shameful, that I was auctioned or that you clapped?" A woman in the back lowered her eyes. "You wanted a spectacle. You got one. And I stood there because I had no choice. But now I do." Her voice cracked, then steadied. "And I choose to stay. I choose to love. And if any of you can say you've done better, go ahead. Speak now." Silence. Thick and long. Then Mrs. Dell stood. The vinegar-tongued widow, who'd never spared a soul. She walked slowly to the bar, poured a shot, and raised it. "Well," she said, "it takes grit to drag your shame into daylight. I'll drink to that." Another man nodded. Then another. Heads turned, not away from her, but toward her, seeing something not fallen, but rising. Percival flushed red. "You think you're somebody now?" Ben stepped forward. "She always was. You were just too small to see it." Percival backed down. He didn't speak again. When they stepped outside, the town behind them full of whispers, the stars were spread wide over Dry Creek Hollow like a promise kept. She leaned into Tim's side, not clinging, just resting, as if the weight of herself had finally found somewhere safe to land. He touched her wrist lightly, felt the ribbon still tied there, worn but sure. They said nothing on the ride home. The moon rose behind them, and the road stretched ahead, open and unafraid. At the porch, he offered her his hand, and this time she took it. When they stepped inside, he stoked the fire. She turned to him and said, "We never had a wedding supper." He smiled, slow and quiet. "We've got cornbread and beans." "That'll do." They ate by firelight, not as strangers, not as broken things salvaged from shame, but as two souls who had knelt in the dust and stood again, together. Later, when the lamp burned low and the night pressed soft against the windows, he reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. And in that silence, deep and wide as prairie sky, she whispered, "We said I do twice." He nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and meant it both times. They didn't kiss. Not that night. But the door stayed unlocked, and the stars kept watch. So if ever you find someone marked by other shame, remember this. The only truth that matters is the one they choose when no one's looking. The kind that says, "Not you are mine, but I'll walk beside you till you find yourself again." And that sometimes is all love really needs.